The moment my father introduced my brother Aidan as the new CEO of Davidson Manufacturing, I felt the air leave my lungs. 3 years of running the company, turning around failing departments, and working 18-hour days meant nothing. The board applauded while my brother, fresh out of business school for just 2 weeks, accepted the position I had earned through sweat and sacrifice. My father avoided my eyes across the conference table. That night, I made a phone call that would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire Davidson legacy. I never planned to join the family business. Growing up, I dreamed of becoming an architect, sketching buildings on napkins, while my father Walter talked business at dinner. But when I graduated from college 12 years ago, my grandfather Frank was sick, and Dad needed help with the company Frank had built from nothing. Davidson Manufacturing was our family legacy, a mid-size industrial equipment manufacturer that had been growing steadily for 40 years. "Just until we get through this rough patch," Dad said. "Then you can pursue whatever you want." That rough patch turned into a decade. I started in customer service, learning how our irrigation pumps and industrial filters worked by handling complaint calls. Then I moved to production, quality control, and eventually sales. By 27, I knew every aspect of our business, from how the assembly line functioned, to which clients ordered which custom specifications. I could troubleshoot machinery problems that stumped our engineers and negotiate contracts that our sales team thought impossible. Meanwhile, my younger brother Aidan went off to get his MBA at Wharton. Every holiday, Dad would gush about Aidan's grades and connections, treating his theoretical case studies like revolutionary business insights. Don't get me wrong, I love my brother. But while he was studying business models in Philadelphia, I was implementing actual solutions in Dayton. 3 years ago, our COO Larry Matthews had a heart attack and took early retirement. The company was in a precarious position with 3 underperforming product lines and outdated inventory systems creating costly inefficiencies. Dad was overwhelmed. I spent 2 weeks preparing a presentation on how I could step in as Chief Operating Officer and turn things around. "This is impressive, Blair," Dad said after my presentation. "You really know the business inside and out." "I've been training for this my whole career," I told him. "Give me a year to prove myself as COO, and we can talk about the future." What I meant was the CEO position. Dad was 65 and had been talking about retirement. He nodded, looking serious. "If you can turn around those product lines and modernize our systems without disrupting operations, we'll definitely have that conversation." I threw myself into the challenge. First, I revamped our industrial filtration line by collaborating with engineering to improve designs and reduce manufacturing costs by 22%. Then I overhauled our inventory management system, implementing new software that reduced errors by 35% and cut delivery times in half. Most importantly, I created 2 specialized teams to resurrect our failing irrigation pump division, bringing in young talent and establishing a direct feedback loop with customers. Mom noticed the toll it was taking. Margaret Davidson had always been the peacemaker in our family, supporting Dad's business decisions while privately acknowledging my contributions. "You look exhausted, honey," she said one Sunday dinner. 70-hour weeks aren't sustainable. "More like 80, I admitted, helping her with the dishes while Dad watched football with Aidan, who was home for the weekend. "Walter should give you a raise at least," she murmured. "You're doing 2 jobs for the price of 1. She wasn't wrong. Despite my expanded responsibilities, my compensation hadn't changed. Each time I brought it up with Dad, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "Let's wait until we see how these changes pan out. The company needs to conserve cash right now." Yet somehow there was cash for Dad to update his company car to a nicer model and for Aidan's business school expenses. My friend Jessica, who worked in HR, would roll her eyes whenever we had lunch together. "You know the staff all thinks you're already the CEO and everything but title," she told me. "Nobody sees your dad much anymore. But you're on the floor every day, fixing problems and knowing everyone's name." After 2 years as COO, all 3 struggling product lines were profitable again. Our employee turnover rate had dropped from 23% to 8%. We'd even expanded into 2 new market segments, growing overall revenue by 18% despite the challenging economy. I scheduled a meeting with Dad to discuss compensation and future leadership. "You've done good work," he acknowledged, reviewing the numbers. "But let's table this discussion until Aiden graduates next month. He's coming home with some big ideas that could take us to the next level." That was the first moment I felt a chill of suspicion. What did Aiden's graduation have to do with my performance review? "Dad, I've been effectively running this company for 2 years without appropriate compensation. I need to know what my path forward looks like." He shuffled papers on his desk. Of course, of course. Let's just wait until the family's all together again. Aiden's very excited to join the business." That night at dinner, Dad couldn't stop talking about Aiden's return. He's been offered positions at 3 consulting firms, but he wants to come home and help grow the family business. His professors say he's got a real gift for strategic thinking. Mom caught my eye across the table, her expression sympathetic. We both knew what was happening, even if neither of us said it aloud. Aiden arrived home with a designer suit and a vocabulary full of business buzzwords. His first day at Davidson Manufacturing, Dad gave him a private office next to his own, while I remained in the open workspace I'd chosen to stay accessible to the team. "Blair, I need you to show Aiden the ropes," Dad instructed. "Take a few weeks to get him up to speed on all operations." So on top of my COO responsibilities and the new client proposal I was developing, I now had to train my brother, who had never worked a day in the actual industry. "This inventory system seems outdated," Aiden commented on our second day, pointing to the software I'd implemented that had saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars. At Wharton, we studied integrated ERP solutions that could revolutionize this process. "This is an integrated solution," I explained patiently. "It's customized for our specific manufacturing requirements and connects directly with our supplier network." Aiden shrugged. "Just seems clunky compared to what I've seen." It continued like this for weeks. Aiden would question processes that had taken me years to optimize, suggesting theoretical alternatives without understanding the practical constraints of our business. Dad began sitting in on more meetings, nodding enthusiastically at Aiden's suggestions while ignoring the concerned looks from department heads. After a particularly frustrating day where Aiden suggested we could easily retool our entire production line over a weekend, I scheduled another meeting with Dad. "I need to discuss my performance review and compensation adjustment," I said firmly. "It's been 3 years since my last raise, despite taking on COO responsibilities and delivering measurable improvements across all departments." Dad leaned back in his chair. "Things are still in flux, Blair. With Aiden bringing in fresh ideas, we need to see how our leadership structure might evolve." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "Just that we have a lot of options to consider." He glanced at his watch. "I've got a call with our banker in 5 minutes. We'll continue this conversation soon, I promise." That evening, I stayed late, reviewing our financial records from the past 3 years. What I found made my blood boil. While my salary had remained frozen, Dad had approved substantial bonuses for himself and other executives. There was even a line item for executive training stipend that precisely matched Aiden's MBA tuition payments. 2 days later, Jessica stopped by my office, her expression unusually serious. "There's a board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning." It wasn't on the regular calendar. "What's it about?" I asked, scrolling through my emails to see if I'd missed something. "I don't know exactly, but I overheard your dad telling Aiden to prepare some remarks." She hesitated. "Blair, I think you should prepare yourself." I spent that night pulling together all our quarterly reports, assuming I'd be called on to present our operational successes. At 8 the next morning, I walked into the boardroom with my materials, only to find all the board members already seated. Dad stood at the head of the table with Aiden beside him, both wearing identical blue ties. "Ah, Blair, good," Dad said. "Take a seat. I was just about to make an announcement." I slid into an empty chair, noticing that several board members couldn't meet my eyes. "As you all know," Dad began, "I've been considering succession planning for some time. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Aiden Davidson, fresh from completing his MBA at Wharton with honors, will be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." The room spun around me. Board members applauded politely while Aiden stepped forward with a practiced smile. Dad continued talking about new generation leadership and fresh strategic direction, but I could barely hear him over the roaring in my ears. Aiden cleared his throat. Thank you, everyone. I'm honored to take on this responsibility and build on the foundation my father and grandfather established. I've spent the past few weeks learning about our operations, and I'm excited to implement some changes that will modernize Davidson manufacturing for the 21st century. He clicked to a PowerPoint slide I'd never seen before. My first initiative will be streamlining our organizational structure. The specialized teams created in recent years, while well-intentioned, have created redundancies that impact our bottom line. By consolidating these functions, we can reduce overhead and improve profitability. The specialized teams he referred to were the ones I'd created to save our irrigation pump division. They weren't redundant. They were essential to the quality control and customer feedback loop that had turned a failing product line into our fastest-growing division. Throughout the hour-long presentation, Aiden outlined plans to dismantle much of what I'd built, presenting my innovations as problems to be solved. Not once did Dad or Aiden acknowledge that I had been effectively running the company for the past 3 years. Not once did anyone mention that most of Aiden's new ideas were based on discussions he'd overheard during the training I'd provided. When the meeting finally ended, board members filed out awkwardly. A few patted my shoulder or whispered, "Sorry," as they passed. Dad was surrounded by well-wishers congratulating Aiden, whose smile never faltered. Jessica found me in my office later, staring blankly at my computer screen. "It's all over the building," she said quietly. "People are shocked. Everyone expected you to be the next CEO." I nodded numbly. Apparently everyone except my father and brother. "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? 3 years of my life given to this company, countless weekends sacrificed, personal relationships put on hold. For what? To be passed over for someone whose only qualification was being the male heir. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but I'm not giving up everything I've built here without a fight." That evening, a family dinner had been planned to celebrate Aiden's new position. Mom tried to catch my eye sympathetically as Dad toasted the future of Davidson manufacturing. Aiden gave a practiced speech about being humbled by the opportunity. "Of course, I'll be relying heavily on Blair's expertise as I transition into this role," he added, raising his glass in my direction. "Her operational knowledge is invaluable." "How generous of you," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Though it would have been nice to know about this succession plan sometime during the 3 years I was actually running the company. An uncomfortable silence fell over the dining room. Dad cleared his throat. "Blair, this isn't the time or place. We can discuss your concerns tomorrow." "When exactly?" I asked. "Between your golf game and Aiden's coronation ceremony?" "That's enough," Dad snapped. "This decision wasn't made lightly. The board and I believe Aiden's education and fresh perspective are what Davidson Manufacturing needs right now." "The board," I repeated. "The board that consists of your golf buddies and 2 cousins? Did anyone happen to review our performance metrics from the past 3 years? Or the fact that every major improvement came from initiatives I developed and implemented?" Mom interjected softly. "Blair, honey, we all know how hard you've worked." "Do we, though?" I stood up, my dinner untouched. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my contributions have been systematically devalued and ignored. Would you like to know what else I discovered yesterday? That while I've gone without a raise for 3 years, Dad approved executive bonuses and paid for Aiden's entire MBA. Dad's face darkened. "The financial decisions I make as CEO are not up for family discussion." "Well, you're right about one thing," I said, placing my napkin beside my plate. "This isn't the time or place. Congratulations on your promotion, Aiden. I hope your theoretical knowledge serves you well in the real world." I left before anyone could respond, driving aimlessly through the streets where I'd grown up. Everything I thought I knew about my future had been upended in a single day. The company I'd helped build, the legacy I thought I was securing, had never truly been mine to claim. The next 2 weeks were excruciating. News of Aiden's appointment spread throughout the industry, with press releases highlighting his education and innovative vision without a single mention of who had actually been running the company. I maintained a professional demeanor at work, But each day became more difficult as Aiden began implementing his changes. He's dismantling the customer feedback team, Jessica told me over coffee. Says it's more efficient to handle complaints through the general customer service line. That team had been instrumental in identifying design flaws before they became widespread problems. Without them, we'd be back to reacting to issues rather than preventing them. I finally cornered Dad in his office after he'd canceled our third scheduled meeting. "We need to talk," I said, closing the door behind me. "Not as father and daughter, but as executives of this company." He sighed heavily. "I know you're upset, Blair, but business decisions can't be based on emotions." That's exactly my point. If we're making decisions based on objective metrics, then explain to me how Aiden is qualified to be CEO when I've demonstrated success in this industry for over a decade. Dad leaned back in his chair, studying me. The CEO role isn't just about operational knowledge. It's about leadership, strategic vision, and client relationships, all of which I've demonstrated consistently, I countered. Our client satisfaction ratings increased 27% under my leadership. Strategic initiatives I implemented have opened new market segments. Blair. His tone was patronizing. You've done excellent work in operations. Nobody's denying that. But the reality is, most of our clients and industry partners expect to deal with a man. I finished for him. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not what I was going to say. But it's what you meant. The truth I'd suspected for years finally lay exposed between us. You never intended to make me CEO, did you? No matter what results I delivered, what innovations I created, what value I added? That's not fair, he protested. I've always supported your career here. By denying me appropriate compensation? By making decisions about my future without consulting me? By allowing me to believe I was on a path to leadership while secretly grooming Aiden? Dad's expression hardened. I don't have to explain my decisions to you. I built this company. No, Grandpa built this company. You expanded it. And I saved it when 3 product lines were failing and our systems were outdated. But none of that matters, because I wasn't born your son. I walked out of his office with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about a title or even compensation. This was about fundamental respect and recognition of my worth. The following week, Aiden implemented his first major organizational change, eliminating the specialized teams I'd created and redistributing their responsibilities among existing departments. The results were immediate and disastrous. Quality control issues surfaced in our newest irrigation pump model, and production efficiency dropped as staff struggled with unclear responsibilities. I tried to advise him privately. These teams worked because they had specialized knowledge and direct accountability. Dispersing those functions creates gaps. The organizational chart was too complex, he insisted. Streamlining improves communication flows. That's basic business administration. Business administration theory doesn't always translate directly to manufacturing reality, I said as patiently as I could. These aren't paper processes. They're people with specific expertise. He dismissed my concerns with a wave. It's just transition friction. The data will show improvement in next quarter's reports. But I knew what the data would show, because I understood our operations in a way that couldn't be learned from business school case studies. The National Manufacturing Association held its annual conference that weekend in Chicago. I'd been invited to speak on a panel about supply chain innovations, an invitation extended before Aiden's appointment. Dad suggested I could skip it, but I refused to give up this professional opportunity. The panel discussion went well, with several attendees approaching me afterward to discuss the inventory management system I'd implemented. As I was gathering my materials, a woman in a tailored charcoal suit approached. "Blair Davidson? I'm Taylor Reed, VP of Operations at Reynolds Industrial." I recognized the name immediately. Reynolds was our biggest competitor in the irrigation equipment space, a family-owned business like ours, but significantly larger. "Nice to meet you," I replied professionally. "Your panel on sustainable manufacturing was interesting." She smiled. "Not as interesting as watching you transform Davidson manufacturing over the past few years. Those efficiency metrics you shared were impressive." We chatted about industry trends, and she invited me to join her for dinner. I hesitated, aware of the competitive relationship between our companies, but my curiosity won out. Over pasta, at an upscale Italian restaurant, Taylor steered the conversation toward my role at Davidson. "I heard about the recent leadership change," she said casually. "Quite a surprise to many of us who follow your industry." I maintained my professional demeanor. "My brother brings a fresh perspective to the company." She twirled pasta around her fork. "And 2 weeks of actual industry experience. Meanwhile, you've been the de facto CEO for years without the title or compensation." My surprise must have shown on my face, because she smiled sympathetically. "The manufacturing world is smaller than people think. Word gets around about who's really driving results." She set down her fork. "Blair, I'm going to be direct. Reynolds Industrial has been watching your work for some time. We're interested in your expertise, particularly as we expand our commercial irrigation division. Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting a conversation about possibilities," she replied carefully. "Initially as a consultant, which wouldn't create the same competitive conflicts. Our CEO, Diane Reynolds, values operational excellence and compensates accordingly." She slid a business card across the table. "Think about it. No pressure. But if you're interested in exploring options where your contributions might be more appropriately valued, call me." I tucked the card into my wallet, thanked her for dinner, and said I'd consider it. But I had no intention of leaving the family business. Despite everything, Davidson Manufacturing was in my blood. I'd helped build it into what it was today. Walking away felt like abandoning my own child. When I returned to the office Monday, I found 3 voicemails from our biggest irrigation client, Jackson Manufacturing. They'd received a shipment with quality issues and couldn't reach anyone over the weekend. The specialized response team that would have handled this had been disbanded in Aiden's reorganization. As I was handling the situation, my email pinged with a message from Dad to the executive team. The subject line read, "Transitional Reorganization Phase 2. I opened it to find a detailed outline of further structural changes, including moving me from COO to a newly created Director of Legacy Operations role that would report to Aiden's newly hired VP of Innovation. The message hadn't been intended for me. I'd been copied accidentally because my name was included in a discussion about who would absorb my current responsibilities. I sat at my desk, staring at the email that so clearly communicated my father's and brother's plans for my future. A future where I would be systematically sidelined, my experience repackaged as legacy in contrast to Aiden's innovation. I pulled Taylor Reed's business card from my wallet and made the call. Taylor arranged for me to meet with Diane Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Industrial, the following week. I took a personal day, telling Jessica I had a doctor's appointment. Reynolds Industrial's headquarters impressed me immediately. Unlike our dated facilities, their campus featured modern architecture with sustainable design elements. The manufacturing floor, visible through glass walls, showed the latest in automated equipment. Diane Reynolds was not what I expected. In her early 60s, with short silver hair and bright blue glasses, she greeted me with a firm handshake and direct gaze. "Blair Davidson. Finally. Taylor has been singing your praises for months." Our conversation covered everything from supply chain management to quality control systems. She asked pointed questions about improvements I'd implemented and challenges I'd encountered. "Let me be candid," Diane said after 2 hours of discussion. "We've been tracking Davidson Manufacturing's performance metrics for years. The turnaround in your irrigation division and inventory systems coincided precisely with your advancement to COO. Those aren't coincidences." She slid a folder across the table. "Here's what we're proposing. A 1-year consulting contract focusing on optimizing our commercial irrigation division. The compensation package is on page 3. I opened the folder and nearly gasped. The proposed compensation was 5 times my current salary, plus performance bonuses tied to measurable improvements. "This seems appropriate for your expertise and proven results," Diane finished for me. "We pay for value at Reynolds, Blair. Gender and family connections don't factor into our decisions." I left with the contract to review, promising to give her an answer within a week. On the drive home, my mind raced. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it would mean walking away from everything I'd built at Davidson. It would mean competing against my own family. I needed perspective from someone who wasn't emotionally involved. Professor Robert Garrett had been my favorite instructor in college. Though I hadn't pursued architecture as planned, we'd stayed in touch, and he'd become something of a mentor. I called and arranged to meet him for coffee. "They never intended to make you CEO," he said after hearing my story. "The question is, why are you still there?" "It's the family business," I said. 3 generations. A family that doesn't value your contributions or compensate you fairly," he pointed out. "Blair, what would you tell one of your employees if they came to you with this situation?" I sighed. "I'd tell them to go where their talents are appreciated and compensated appropriately. So why is your advice to others better than what you're willing to accept for yourself?" It was a question I couldn't answer easily. After 3 sleepless nights reviewing the Reynolds contract and considering my options, I made my decision. I would resign from Davidson Manufacturing, but I would do it responsibly, with a proper transition plan to protect the employees who had nothing to do with my family's politics. I drafted a detailed transition document outlining all my current projects, contact information for key clients, and systems only I fully understood. Then I scheduled a meeting with Dad. "I'm resigning," I said simply, sliding my formal letter across his desk. He stared at the paper. "Is this some kind of negotiating tactic?" "No. It's a decision I've made after careful consideration. I've prepared a transition plan to ensure minimal disruption to operations." "Blair, be reasonable. If this is about the title or reporting structure, we can discuss modifications." "This is about recognizing reality," I replied calmly. "You and Aiden have made your plans for the company clear. Those plans don't include valuing my contributions appropriately. I found an opportunity that does." His face darkened. "With one of our competitors, I assume?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss my future employment." Dad picked up my resignation letter, his expression hardening. "You realize that your employment contract includes non-compete and confidentiality clauses." "I've reviewed those with legal counsel," I said, having consulted with Samuel Wilson, a lawyer friend from college. "The non-compete as written is overly broad and likely unenforceable, but rest assured, I have no intention of violating confidentiality regarding Davidson's proprietary information." "This is how you repay everything I've done for you? By walking away when things don't go your way?" The unfairness of his statement stung. "Dad, I've given 12 years to this company. The last 3, I've essentially been the CEO without the title or compensation. I've created value that will continue benefiting Davidson long after I'm gone. That's not walking away when things don't go my way. That's recognizing when a situation has become untenable." News of my resignation spread quickly. Aiden appeared in my office later that day, his confident facade cracking slightly. "You can't just leave," he said. "There are systems only you understand. All documented in the transition materials I've prepared," I replied, continuing to pack my personal items. "And if you'd spent more time learning the actual business instead of planning organizational charts, you might understand them too." His expression hardened. "Dad wants you to sign this enhanced separation agreement before you leave." The document he handed me included much stricter non-compete and non-solicitation clauses than my original employment contract, plus a gag order preventing me from discussing Davidson's business practices with anyone. "I'm not signing this," I said, handing it back. "My original contract stands, and I'll honor the provisions that are legally enforceable." "We can make things difficult for you," Aiden warned. "And I can make things difficult for Davidson," I countered, "like publicizing how the company treated the woman who turned around 3 failing product lines and modernized its operations. Is that the kind of press you want in your first month as CEO?" On my last day, Jessica organized a small gathering in the break room. Nearly every employee stopped by to wish me well and expressed dismay at my departure. As I was carrying the last box to my car, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Davidson? This is Robert Jackson from Jackson Manufacturing. I'm trying to resolve some quality issues with our last order, and no one at Davidson seems able to help." Jackson Manufacturing was our largest irrigation equipment client, responsible for over $2 million in annual revenue. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson, but today is actually my last day at Davidson. I'd be happy to connect you with someone who can assist." You're leaving? He sounded genuinely upset. Your team has been the only reason we've stayed with Davidson through the pricing increases. The new organizational structure has been a nightmare to navigate. I'm sorry to hear that. Let me give you the contact information for the current team handling your account. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the building where I'd spent my entire professional life. Part of me felt like I was abandoning ship. Another part recognized that the ship's captain and first mate had already decided to set me adrift. I started my car and drove away from Davidson Manufacturing, ready to begin the next chapter of my career, where my value would be recognized not by my last name, but by my abilities. My first day at Reynolds Industrial felt like stepping into a different world. Instead of the familiar but outdated facilities at Davidson, Reynolds' operations were sleek and modern. Diane Reynolds introduced me to the leadership team, including COO Mark Fletcher, with whom I'd be working closely. Blair comes to us with exceptional experience in optimizing manufacturing operations, Diane told the group. Her consulting work will focus on our commercial irrigation division, which, as you all know, has significant growth potential. Mark nodded enthusiastically. We've been trying to crack that market segment for years. Davidson has dominated it. Not for lack of trying on our part, Diane added. But sometimes you need specialized insight. I was careful in those early meetings to focus on general industry knowledge, rather than Davidson-specific information. While I had no legally enforceable non-compete restriction, I was determined to maintain ethical boundaries and win on my own merit. The commercial irrigation market has unique requirements that differ from residential systems, I explained in my first presentation. Water conservation compliance, remote monitoring capabilities, and modular expandability are the three pillars customers prioritize. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in Reynolds' operations, learning their systems and processes. I identified inefficiencies in their production flow and suggested reorganizing workstations to reduce bottlenecks. The manufacturing team was initially resistant to changes from an outsider, but as efficiency improved, skepticism gave way to appreciation. My consulting arrangement gave me flexibility I'd never had at Davidson. I worked 4 days a week at Reynolds and used the 5th day to establish my independent life. I found a small but charming house in a neighborhood across town from my parents, purchased my own furniture, and began creating a home that reflected my personal style rather than family expectations. The distance gave me perspective. For years, I'd been so entrenched in Davidson Manufacturing that I'd lost sight of other possibilities. Now, I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been submerged by professional demands and family dynamics. 6 weeks into my contract, I presented recommendations for Reynolds' irrigation division. My suggestions included redesigning 2 key products to better meet commercial needs, implementing a specialized quality control process similar to the one I'd created at Davidson, but with important differences, and developing a customer feedback system that would continuously inform product improvements. This is exactly what we needed, Diane said after reviewing the plan. The question is, can you implement it rather than just recommend it? Implementation wasn't part of my original contract, I pointed out. Then let's amend it, she replied without hesitation. Same compensation rate, extended timeline. We need your expertise on the ground, not just on paper. The confidence she showed in my abilities was intoxicating after years of having my contributions minimized. With the contract amended, I dove into implementation, personally overseeing the product redesigns and building the specialized teams needed to execute my vision. 3 months after leaving Davidson, I received my first performance bonus from Reynolds when the redesigned commercial irrigation controller passed all quality benchmarks and moved to production 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The bonus alone was nearly half my annual salary at Davidson. News about Davidson Manufacturing began reaching me through industry channels. Their newest irrigation pump model, the one rushed through Aiden's streamlined development process, was experiencing field failures at an alarming rate. Jessica, who still met me for occasional lunches, confirmed the problems. Quality control is a mess, she said. Without the specialized teams you created, issues that should have been caught in testing are reaching customers. Returns are up 60%. I felt conflicted hearing about Davidson's struggles. On one hand, it validated my concerns about Aiden's inexperienced leadership. On the other, many good people I'd worked with were likely suffering the consequences. How are things otherwise? I asked. Morale is at an all-time low, Jessica admitted. 3 department managers have resigned. Everyone's waiting for your father to step in and course correct, but he seems determined to let Aiden learn through failure. Meanwhile, my work at Reynolds was flourishing. Diane invited me to participate in strategic planning meetings that extended beyond my consulting focus, valuing my input on broader business questions. In one such meeting, I suggested Reynolds could leverage their superior quality control processes as a competitive advantage in marketing materials. Customers care about reliability more than marginal price differences, I explained, especially after experiencing product failures from competitors. Mark nodded enthusiastically. We could emphasize our testing protocols and lower return rates in sales presentations, and back it up with actual data, I added. Transparency builds trust. Diane studied me thoughtfully. That's the kind of strategic thinking we need more of around here, Blair. Have you considered a more permanent position with Reynolds? The question caught me off guard. My consulting contract runs for several more months. I'm thinking beyond that, she said. Mark is planning to retire next year. We're going to need a new COO, someone with strong operational knowledge and strategic vision. The implicit offer hung in the air. After the meeting, Diane asked me to stay behind. I meant what I said about the COO position, she told me. I've been watching how you work, how you think, how you inspire people to follow your lead. Those are qualities you can't teach. I'm flattered, I replied honestly. But I've learned to be cautious about future promises. She smiled understandingly. Fair enough. Let's revisit the conversation in a few months, when you've had more time with us. In the meantime, consider this a formal acknowledgement of my interest in your long-term future with Reynolds. That evening, I signed the closing paperwork on my new house. As I walked through the empty rooms with my realtor, planning where furniture would go and what colors I'd paint the walls, I felt a sense of ownership that extended beyond the property. I was building a life on my terms, making decisions based on my values rather than others' expectations. The following week brought unexpected news. Westfield Industries, one of the largest agricultural companies in the Midwest and a long-standing Davidson client, reached out to Reynolds specifically requesting that I be involved in their upcoming irrigation system upgrade. They've heard about the improvements you've implemented here, Mark explained. Their procurement officer mentioned your work at Davidson was the main reason they stayed with them for so long. The Westfield contract would be worth over $5 million, a significant portion of which had previously gone to Davidson annually. While I hadn't solicited the business, the request put me in an ethically complex position. I need to be careful about this, I told Diane. I don't want any appearance of poaching clients. They approached us, she reminded me, and specifically asked for you by name. That's not poaching, that's reputation. But I understand your concern. What if you consult on the technical specifications but don't participate in sales meetings? We crafted a careful approach that maintained ethical boundaries while honoring Westfield's request for my expertise. When Reynolds secured the contract, it represented not just a financial win but validation that my professional value extended beyond the Davidson name. 6 months after leaving Davidson Manufacturing, I had established myself as a respected consultant, purchased my own home, and begun building a reputation independent of my family legacy. What I hadn't anticipated was how this professional separation would impact family relationships. Mom called regularly, but our conversations remained surface level. She never mentioned the business directly, though I could sense her concern. Dad hadn't spoken to me since my resignation, and Aiden's only communication had been a terse email asking for passwords to systems I'd managed. Jessica's updates grew increasingly concerning. They've lost the Jackson account, she told me during our monthly lunch, and 2 others are threatening to follow. That's nearly 30% of the irrigation division revenue, I said, alarmed despite myself. I know. There's talk of layoffs if things don't turn around by quarter's end. The news troubled me. Despite everything, I didn't want to see the company my grandfather built collapse. Nor did I want loyal employees to lose their livelihoods because of poor leadership decisions. But my focus needed to remain on my new path. I'd spent enough years trying to save Davidson Manufacturing. Now it was time to build my own success story at Reynolds Industrial. 8 months after my departure from Davidson, industry publications began reporting on the company's financial difficulties. One trade journal ran a detailed analysis titled Davidson Manufacturing's Downward Spiral: When Succession Planning Goes Wrong. The article didn't mention me by name, but referenced significant organizational changes that coincided with quality control issues and customer departures. Diane called me into her office after the article published. "Have you seen this?" I nodded. "It's not unexpected, given what I've heard. We're starting to get inquiries from Davidson clients," she said. "Not just Westfield. 3 others have reached out in the past week." "What are you telling them?" "The truth. That we're happy to discuss their needs, but don't engage in negative selling against competitors." She studied me. "This puts you in an awkward position, I realize." "I've been careful to maintain professional boundaries," I assured her. "I know. Your integrity is one of the reasons I'm formally offering you the COO position when Mark retires in 4 months." She slid a document across her desk. "This is the offer package. It includes an equity stake in Reynolds, which is something we've never offered an executive who isn't family." The compensation package was extraordinary, almost 7 times what I'd earned at Davidson. More importantly, it included real ownership in the company and a clear path to CEO succession when Diane eventually retired. "This is incredibly generous," I said, genuinely moved. "It's not generosity, it's business," she replied matter-of-factly. "You've increased efficiency in our irrigation division by 38% in 8 months. The Westfield contract alone covered your consulting fees 5 times over. This is what recognizing value looks like, Blair." I was reviewing the offer at home that evening when my phone rang with my mother's number. "Blair?" "It's Mom." Her voice sounded strained. "Your father's in the hospital." My heart dropped. "What happened?" "They're saying stress-induced cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but—" Her voice broke. "He collapsed during a board meeting. Aiden called the ambulance." I drove to the hospital immediately, finding Mom in the waiting room, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "They're running tests," she said when I hugged her. "The doctor said it's not critical, but they're concerned about his blood pressure." Aiden arrived shortly after, his face pale and his typically immaculate appearance disheveled. "They were reviewing the quarterly financials," he said without preamble. "The irrigation division is down 42%. Jackson's contract cancellation hit harder than expected." I didn't point out that this was precisely what I'd warned would happen when he dismantled my specialized teams. This wasn't the time. Dad was stabilized and admitted for observation. When we were allowed to see him, the sight of him in a hospital bed, monitoring wires attached to his chest, made my anger temporarily recede. Whatever our professional differences, he was still my father. "Blair." His voice was weaker than usual. "You came." "Of course I came," I said, taking his hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like an old fool," he admitted with unusual candor. "Too proud for my own good." Mom and Aiden stepped out to speak with the doctor, leaving us alone. "The company's in trouble," Dad said after a moment. "Real trouble." "I've heard," I replied neutrally. "Those teams you created." He sighed. "Dismantling them was a mistake. You were right about how they functioned together." It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging my business judgment had been sound. But it was too little, too late. "Dad, focus on getting better. The company can wait." He shook his head slightly. Might not be much company left to worry about soon. Over the next week, I visited Dad daily as he recovered. The cardiac event had shaken him, making him more reflective than I'd ever seen him. On the day before his discharge, he brought up the business again. "I made mistakes, Blair. With the company. With you, it's water under the bridge," I said, not wanting to stress him further. "No, it's not. I let my own biases blind me. The clients, the board. None of them cared if the CEO was a woman. That was all in my head." He looked at me directly. "I'm sorry." The apology I'd wanted for so long landed with less impact than I'd imagined. Perhaps because it had come too late. Or perhaps because I'd already moved on to build something new. Thank you for saying that, I said simply. As Dad's health improved, Davidson Manufacturing's condition worsened. 2 weeks after his hospitalization, Aiden showed up at my house unannounced on a Saturday morning. "We need to talk," he said, looking exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual confident demeanor had vanished. I invited him in reluctantly. "What's this about, Aiden?" "The company is failing," he admitted, slumping onto my couch. "The bank is threatening to call our operating loan. If that happens, we'll have to lay off 30% of the workforce immediately." "That's unfortunate," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." "Because we need you back," he said bluntly. "The systems you created, the client relationships you built, we're drowning without them." I stared at him, processing the audacity of his request. "You want me to come back and fix the mess you created by dismantling everything I built?" "It's not just about me anymore," he argued. "It's about 300 employees who might lose their jobs. It's about Dad's legacy, Grandpa's legacy. The same legacy I was apparently unqualified to lead, despite years of demonstrated success." Aiden had the grace to look ashamed. "I was arrogant and inexperienced. I thought my degree and Dad's confidence were enough." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I was wrong, okay? Catastrophically wrong." Part of me felt vindicated hearing him admit his mistakes. Another part recognized the human cost of Davidson's potential collapse. "What exactly are you asking for, Aiden?" "Come back. Help us rebuild what was lost. Dad's willing to step down completely. You could be CEO. For real this time. And you? I'll take whatever role you think is appropriate. I've learned the hard way that I have a lot more to learn." The offer was tempting in a way I hadn't expected. Despite everything, Davidson Manufacturing had been my professional home for 12 years. I'd helped build it. I cared about the people who worked there. "I can't just abandon Reynolds," I said. "They've treated me with respect and recognized my value from day one." "Then consult for us," Aiden suggested desperately. "Part-time, on your terms." I studied my brother, seeing for the first time the weight of responsibility he'd been unprepared to carry. "Let me think about it." After Aiden left, I called Jessica for an unfiltered assessment of Davidson's situation. What she told me was worse than Aiden had admitted. "It's not just the bank loan," she said. "Your dad mortgaged the family home to secure additional financing last month. If the company goes under, your parents could lose everything." The news stunned me. The family home had been my grandparents' before my parents'. Mom loved that house, and its gardens that she'd tended for 30 years. "Does Mom know?" "I don't think so," Jessica replied. "It was done quickly, without much discussion." That evening, I sat on my back porch, reviewing my options. Reynolds had offered me an exceptional opportunity, with a clear path to leadership. Returning to Davidson in any capacity meant re-entering the family dynamics that had undervalued me for years. Yet the thought of employees losing jobs and my mother losing her home weighed heavily on my conscience. As I considered the situation, a third option began taking shape in my mind. Not a return to Davidson, not a complete abandonment either, but something more transformative. Something that could potentially save what was worth saving, while creating something new and better. The next morning, I called Diane Reynolds and requested an urgent meeting. "I need to discuss something unconventional with you," I told her when we met in her office. "It involves Davidson Manufacturing." Diane's expression remained neutral. "Go on." "Davidson is failing, largely due to poor leadership decisions after my departure. They've approached me about returning." "And are you considering it?" she asked, her tone careful. "Not in the way they proposed. But I've been thinking about a different approach." I took a deep breath. "What would Reynolds think about acquiring Davidson's irrigation division?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "An acquisition? That's certainly unexpected. Davidson's irrigation technology is still fundamentally sound," I explained. "The quality issues stem from dismantled processes, not bad product design. With proper management, those products could complement Reynolds' portfolio rather than competing with it. And the rest of Davidson? Their filtration and pump divisions are still performing adequately. A restructured, smaller Davidson could potentially survive with those product lines. Diane considered this for a long moment. You're essentially suggesting we rescue the division you built while allowing the rest of the company to continue independently. It would be a business decision, not a rescue, I countered. Reynolds gets proven product designs, manufacturing capacity, and established client relationships. Davidson gets needed capital and a path to survival. And what would your role be in this scenario? I'd lead the integration of Davidson's irrigation division into Reynolds and continue as planned with the COO position here. Diane tapped her fingers thoughtfully on her desk. This would need board approval, and Davidson would need to be open to selling their most established division. They don't have many options left, I said simply. Let me discuss this with the board, Diane concluded. In the meantime, don't make any commitments to Davidson. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Samuel Wilson, the family lawyer who had helped me review my employment contract months earlier. Blair, I hope you don't mind me calling. Your father asked me to reach out. About what? He wants to discuss options for Davidson Manufacturing. He mentioned you and Aiden had spoken about the company's difficulties. We did, I confirmed. Would you be willing to meet with him and the board? Not at the company offices? Perhaps somewhere neutral? I'll meet with him, I agreed. But I should warn you, my suggestion may not be what he's expecting. 2 days later, I sat across from Dad, Aiden, and 3 board members in a private room at a local restaurant. Dad looked better than he had in the hospital, but still frail. The confidence that had characterized him throughout my life noticeably diminished. Thank you for coming, Blair, he began formally. As Aiden may have mentioned, Davidson Manufacturing is facing significant challenges. I nodded. I'm aware of the situation. We'd like to discuss your potential return to the company in an executive capacity. The board has unanimously agreed that your operational expertise is critically needed. I appreciate that recognition, I said carefully. But I've accepted a position as Chief Operating Officer at Reynolds Industrial, effective when their current COO retires in 3 months. Shock registered on their faces. Aiden recovered first. Blair, please. The company our family built for 3 generations is on the brink of collapse. I understand that, which is why I'm not here to discuss returning to Davidson. I'm here to propose a different solution. I opened my laptop and turned it to face them. I've put together a proposal for Reynolds Industrial to acquire Davidson's irrigation division. The silence that followed my proposal was deafening. Dad stared at the presentation on my screen, his expression unreadable. Aiden looked between us, clearly trying to gauge how to react. You want to sell off our most successful division? One board member finally asked. I want to save what can be saved, I replied evenly. Davidson's irrigation division is struggling now, but the underlying technology remains valuable. Reynolds has the management structure and quality control systems to restore its profitability. Meanwhile, the capital from the sale would allow Davidson to restructure around its filtration and pump divisions, which are still viable. This feels like retribution, Aiden said quietly. I shook my head. This is business, not emotion. If Davidson continues on its current path, there won't be any divisions left in 6 months. This approach preserves jobs, honors client commitments, and gives the company a fighting chance to survive. Dad hadn't spoken yet, his eyes still fixed on the screen where I'd projected financial models showing both the acquisition value and the restructuring possibilities for the remaining divisions. You've thought this through completely, he finally said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. That's what I do, I replied simply. Create solutions to complex problems. The board members asked pointed questions about valuation, employee retention, and transition timelines. I answered each one methodically, having anticipated their concerns. Throughout the discussion, I maintained professional detachment, focusing on business realities rather than family history. Reynolds' board is reviewing this proposal tomorrow, I concluded. If both sides are interested in proceeding, we can begin formal discussions immediately. As the meeting wrapped up, Dad asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he looked at me with new eyes. This isn't how I imagined things would go, he admitted. When I pictured the company's future, I always saw it remaining independent, in the family. Sometimes reality forces us to reimagine our futures, I said. This approach preserves what matters most: the livelihoods of loyal employees and the core technology Grandpa developed. The name on the building is less important than the people inside it. When did you get so wise? He asked, with a sad smile. I've always had this perspective, Dad. You just weren't listening. The following weeks were a whirlwind of negotiations, due diligence, and planning. Reynolds' board approved the acquisition concept with enthusiasm, recognizing the strategic value of Davidson's irrigation technology and client relationships. Davidson's board, facing limited options, agreed to the sale with conditions focused on employee retention and transition support. I worked closely with legal teams from both companies, ensuring the agreement protected what mattered most. A key provision guaranteed positions for all irrigation division employees who wished to transition to Reynolds. Another established a structured timeline that would allow Davidson to reorganize its remaining divisions without disruption. Diane Reynolds impressed me throughout the process with her strategic vision and ethical approach. We're not here to dismantle a competitor, she told me during one planning session. We're here to integrate complementary strengths and create something better than either company could achieve alone. That perspective guided our approach to the merger, focusing on preservation of institutional knowledge and respect for Davidson's history, while implementing Reynolds' superior management practices. As negotiations progressed, my relationship with Dad gradually shifted. Working together on the transition plan required hours of collaboration, during which he began to see firsthand the depth of my business acumen. For perhaps the first time, he treated me as a respected peer, rather than a daughter to be directed. The specialized quality control team you created, he commented during one session. Reynolds should definitely preserve that structure. It was the backbone of our success in the municipal market. I've already discussed that with Diane, I assured him. It's included in the integration plan, he nodded thoughtfully. You know, when you first presented this acquisition idea, I thought you were punishing us. Now I see you're saving what can be saved, just like you always did. 1 month before the merger was set to finalize, we held a joint company meeting to announce the details to all employees. I stood on stage beside Dad, Aiden, Diane, and Mark, facing hundreds of anxious faces from both companies. Dad spoke first, explaining the strategic rationale for the acquisition and expressing confidence in the future of both the transitioning irrigation division and the restructured Davidson manufacturing. Then he surprised me by saying, "This solution came from Blair Davidson, who saw a path forward when the rest of us could only see obstacles. Her vision and expertise will guide the irrigation division as it joins Reynolds Industrial, and I couldn't be prouder of her leadership." The public acknowledgement meant more than I had expected. When it was my turn to speak, I focused on the practical aspects of the transition, reassuring employees about job security, and explaining the integration timeline. But I also spoke from the heart. Change can be frightening, but it also creates opportunities. This merger represents the best of both companies, coming together traditions of excellence from Davidson and forward-thinking management from Reynolds. I've had the privilege of working with both organizations, and I can tell you with confidence that this combination will be stronger than either company alone. In the weeks that followed, I divided my time between finalizing the merger details and preparing to assume the COO position at Reynolds. The irrigation division transition proceeded smoothly, with 95% of employees choosing to remain with the division as it joined Reynolds. Meanwhile, Aiden surprised me by approaching his new role in the restructured Davidson with unexpected humility. With Dad stepping back into an advisory role to protect his health, Aiden became CEO of the smaller but more focused company. This time, however, he actively sought advice and listened to experienced department heads. "I've learned my lesson," he told me over coffee one morning. "Business school teaches you models and theories, but real leadership comes from respecting the knowledge of people who do the work every day." "That's probably the most insightful thing I've ever heard you say," I told him with a smile. "Well, failure is a powerful teacher," he admitted. "I never want to feel that helpless again." The day the merger officially closed, Reynolds held a celebration at their headquarters. As I mingled with employees from both companies, now colleagues working toward shared goals, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for the business solution I'd engineered, but for the personal journey that had brought me here. Mom and Dad attended the event, Mom beaming with pride as Diane introduced me as Reynolds' incoming Chief Operating Officer. Dad, still recovering but looking better than he had in months, shook hands with former competitors and spoke optimistically about the future of both companies. Later that evening, I found myself alone with Diane on the balcony overlooking the manufacturing floor, now integrated with equipment from Davidson's irrigation division. "You know what impresses me most about how you handled this?" she said, gesturing toward the busy production line below. "You found a solution that created value instead of destroying it. Most people in your position would have either walked away completely or returned with demands for control and recognition. Neither of those options would have served the people who matter," I replied. "The employees who built both companies deserve better." She nodded. "That perspective is why you'll make an excellent COO. And someday, when I retire, an excellent CEO." 6 months later, with the merger fully implemented and Reynolds' irrigation division showing record profitability, I officially stepped into the role of Chief Operating Officer. My office overlooked the production floor where employees from both former companies worked side by side, creating products that combined Davidson's innovative designs with Reynolds' quality control standards. The restructured Davidson manufacturing had stabilized under Aiden's more collaborative leadership. While smaller than before, the company had found renewed focus in its filtration and pump divisions, with promising growth in new market segments. Dad had transitioned to a part-time advisory role that allowed him to share his industry knowledge without the stress of daily management. Our relationship, while not perfect, had evolved into something more balanced than I'd ever thought possible. He had finally recognized my value, not as a daughter following in his footsteps, but as a business leader charting my own course. At Sunday dinner at my parents' home, now freed from the mortgage Dad had taken out, Mom raised her glass in a toast. "To both our companies flourishing," she said, "including me and the family business legacy in a new way." Later, as we sat on the porch swing, Dad turned to me. "I was wrong about so many things, Blair. I was so fixated on preserving tradition that I couldn't see the future right in front of me." "The future worked out differently than any of us expected," I acknowledged. "But maybe it's better this way. Two healthy companies instead of one failing one." He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said that day you proposed the merger, about how the name on the building matters less than the people inside it. Your grandfather would have agreed with you. He always said taking care of his employees was his first responsibility." "That's a legacy worth preserving," I said quietly. "And you found a way to do that, even when it meant creating something new instead of preserving something old." He patted my hand. "That took more courage and vision than simply following the path I laid out. The wisdom I'd gained through this journey wasn't what I'd expected. I'd learned that true leadership isn't about titles or even recognition. It's about seeing clearly what needs to be done and finding the courage to do it, even when the path forward looks nothing like the one you originally imagined. I'd learned that knowing your worth doesn't mean demanding acknowledgement, but rather creating environments where your contributions can flourish. Sometimes that means walking away from situations that undervalue you, and sometimes it means finding creative solutions that transform those very situations. Most importantly, I'd learned that success isn't measured by winning at someone else's expense, but by creating value that lifts everyone around you. The merger hadn't been about proving my father wrong or vindicating my wounded pride. It had been about saving jobs, preserving innovation, and creating something stronger than what existed before. As I look back on that pivotal board meeting where my brother was announced as CEO, I realize it wasn't the ending of my story, but rather the beginning of a more authentic journey. Sometimes the greatest opportunities emerge from our deepest disappointments, if we have the wisdom to see beyond our initial pain to the possibilities that lie ahead. Have you ever faced a situation where you were undervalued despite your contributions? How did you respond? Was there a time when walking away from something familiar opened doors to something better? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and transformation. And if you know someone struggling with similar challenges in their career or family business, Share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you recognize your own worth and the power of staying true to your values, even when it's difficult.